everybody, and welcome to our webinar on employment law. My colleague Matt and I are delighted to be running this session for you. We hope that you'll enjoy this webinar and get involved with the conversation. I'm going to pass over to Matt and the panellists in just a moment, but first I'm going to quickly run through some house rules. First and foremost, please use the online question tool to post any questions that you have, and Matt will be posing them to our speakers throughout the presentation. Please also use this tool to let us know if you have any audio or visual problems during the webinar, and we will do our best to resolve them for you. Please note that this webinar is recorded, and the recording of the session will be posted online, and we'll send a link to all webinar attendees after the webinar. Please also feel free to post about the webinar on social media using #LCNwebinar and tagging us on Instagram and Twitter. I'm going to first start by asking all attendees to answer a poll which is about to appear on your screens. And this poll will just let us know at what stage you are at in your legal journey. Okay, brilliant, thank you. So this will help our panellists today understand what stage you're all at. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Matt and to the panellists. Over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Neve, and welcome everybody this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. We are joined by two august panelists today, and without further ado, I'd like them to give a very brief introduction of themselves and, importantly, the firm they work for, so that we can have a bit of context. So, Karen, if you could go first, please.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, so I'm Karen Baxter. I'm a partner at Silkin. For anyone who's not aware of us, Silkin is a sort of medium-sized law firm. We have 7 offices across the UK and in Hong Kong and Ireland as well. Our kind of raison d'etre is to focus on ideas, people and possibilities. So that's all about sort of focusing on the really key important things that matter to businesses. And employment law is a huge part of our people offering and our people strategy, and so that's where I sit within the business.
Great, thank you very much. And Rebecca?
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Mullins and I am an associate at Burges Salmon. Burges Salmon is a Bristol headquartered firm, but there are offices in London, Edinburgh and Dublin as well, and I am based up in our Edinburgh office. So as a firm, we really differentiate ourselves because of our people, our caring culture and our focus on client relationships. And we have a great community spirit and are incredibly committed to being a responsible business. And we capture these themes under our pillars, which are culture, ambition, responsibility, expertise and side by side. I would say it's an amazing firm to work at. I don't know if we'll have any Roll on Friday listeners here today, but the firm has been voted the best law firm to work at for the last 2 years by Roll on Friday, as you know, from the people that work there. So it really is a great culture, and I can't recommend it highly enough if you're looking at law firms.
Great, thank you very much. So first up, we're talking about employment law. Karen, what do we mean by employment law? What's its scope?
So employment law covers pretty much everything to do with the world of work. So everything from hiring to firing and everything in between. By everything in between, that can cover disciplinary grievances, it can cover contracts, negotiating complicated pay structures. It can cover sort of whenever people fall out, how you deal with that. It can encompass things like pensions, it can cover immigration. So it's a really, really broad topic, and it covers sort of the legal and edges into the non-legal in some areas where you're trying to work out how to get people to work together as effectively as possible.
Okay, and thank you for that. And Rebecca, is it just working with clients who are businesses who you're dealing direct with their people, or is it also other elements of client work?
So at my firm, we do primarily advise businesses. So the majority of our clients would be on the employer side, but we do from time to time work with individuals as well. But generally firms will differentiate as to whether they work with employees or employers. So the people that we advise might be the business owners or their HR teams or legal teams.
Okay, and so and what do you personally do? What's the main thrust of your activities?
We're pretty generalist, so within our employment team we all do a little bit of everything, so that can mean that we might be advising a client on general policies or contracts, and we might be working with our corporate team to advise on the employment aspects of a corporate transaction, or we might be defending a client in an employment tribunal. So we work across the full range of employment law to get experience in everything, and that continues right up to the highest level at Burges Salmon, and then we have specialists in kind of other areas that will work alongside on different transactions.
Great. Okay, thank you. And Karen, how's employment law actually organised at Lewis Silkin? What's the range of stuff that you do?
So at Lewis Silkin we have a huge employment team, a couple of hundred employment lawyers. And so we are, as a team, a generalist team, we cover all the bases, but we do have specialist teams within our team. So we have people who focus on high court employment work. So that would be where somebody is leaving a business and is threatening to compete or to steal clients, and you want to take them to court to try and stop that. So we have a team that specialise in that. We then have teams that focus on TUPE transactions, so where teams are being a business might be being bought or sold, and the employees that go with it, advising on that. Personally, I focus on investigations work, so I spend about half of my time, I head up our investigations team, so I go and conduct investigations into allegations of wrongdoing in businesses. So we cover a very broad range. We have a specialist team of immigration lawyers, so we generally speaking don't dabble in immigration as well as employment. People would sit in one team or the other, but obviously we work very closely together. And then we all have teams that focus on equal pay issues, and then we also structure ourselves around sectors as well, in terms of the client-facing sectors, and trying to focus on, we might have teams that focus on professional services and banking. We might have a team that focuses on technology clients or kind of luxury goods, those sorts of things. So we kind of can focus on the client markets as well.
Great. Okay, so a really big range, and I think we'll go back in a minute to some maybe a bit more detail about investigations. That sounds really interesting, and also maybe a little bit about how one finds oneself within these various different niches. But if I can return to you now, Rebecca, maybe we could have a quick bit between when I was asking you previously. I was also trying to look at the difference between the corporate transactions and how you work with other parts of the firm compared to perhaps the clients have come straight to you as an employment practice. So what do we mean by supporting the corporate side?
So if we're supporting our corporate team, that would come about usually through a big corporate transaction. So they might be advising a client who is looking to purchase another company, and in pretty much all cases, there'll be employment implications. So either there'll be a few founders who are going to be remaining in the business, or there might be a number of employees. So our role will be to, if we were acting for the buyer, to carry out a due diligence process, which is where you're essentially reviewing the company that your client is looking to buy and checking for any risks. So that would usually be the initial stage, and we'd then be involved in drafting the employment aspects of the corporate documentation. So it might be specific warranties and indemnities that we're looking at within a corporate document, and then it might also be that we're asked to draft new contracts of employment or prepare new policies if they're not already in place.
Okay, so if I was to be, if I was a potential recruit and I was asking questions about an employment practice, how would I get a feel for it? Would I say sort of, what's the breakdown of your client base, or how would I ask those questions just to really lift the lid on it?
I suppose if you're speaking with a recruiter, the first question you'd want to ask is, does the firm do employer or employee based work? Because that will really influence what kind of work you're doing. If you're working for individuals, your role would be quite different, and you're maybe less likely to be involved in corporate type work, or working with other teams on transactions. So that would be my first question, I think. And then I would also want to ask if they can give any examples of types of clients they work with, so that you can maybe get a flavour of what size of client they advise, and how much work there might be within the team.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. So again, thinking about Lewis Silkin's big employment practice, what are the sort of who are the kind of clients that you work with? Are there any people that you can sort of just give us a feel for the kind of people you act for?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, a lot of the time, who we act for is top secret, and we're not allowed to talk about the work we're doing. But there are some clients who are quite happy for us to name them, and I've made sure I've got the latest list from our marketing team to make sure I can name the right ones. So examples, so in the tech space, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn are big clients. Sports, we act for quite a lot of big sports teams. So Chelsea Football Club is an example of that. Then we act for other sort of big corporate clients. So Deliveroo, EasyJet are a couple of examples of that. And then looking at the high street, Marks and Spencer, Zara, those kinds of retail businesses. So that just gives you a flavour of the kind of different sectors and different focuses we look at. The other thing is that we act for an awful lot of law firms, and that's a lot of what I do day to day. Obviously, I can't name them, but we act for more than half of the top 30.
Sure. Okay, there'll be two related questions here. I guess the first one is just to sort of, thinking about what's the breakdown of contentious and non-contentious work. I mean, what proportion of, employment advice is when things are going wrong, and what proportion of it is when it's just advice about transactions. I mean, if you looked at the whole gamut of employment lawyers, what proportion are doing the difficult stuff, and how many are making deals happen?
That's me, Matt.
Sorry? Yes, please. Yeah.
Yep,
sorry.
Me. So I think that largely does go to Rebecca's point about, is it a firm that does a lot of corporate transactions? Because the work on corporate transactions is all non-contentious work. So I have a slightly skewed perspective, because at Lewis Silkin, our employment team is a lot bigger than our corporate team. So while we do corporate transactions, it's a very small part of what we do. So you probably have a different view if you worked in a firm that does a lot of corporate work. So for us, because we're not doing that as much, I would say it's probably at no more than sort of 50-50 in terms of contentious, non-contentious. The other thing is that on the non-transactional work, the divide between contentious and non-contentious is much less clear, because you will start advising on something when it's in its infancy and when it's a non-contentious, as in not in litigation, but it might turn into litigation later, and you see it all the way through. So there's a bit of a sort of grey area in between in terms of the sort of advisory work which can become contentious.
Okay, well that's an interesting point as well. So maybe return back to you, Rebecca. I mean, with the kind of matters that you're dealing with, are you quite often there right from the start right to the finish, or are you? Or I mean, I guess one question might be how many matters are you working on at any given time? Are you doing one big project, or are you doing lots of bits?
Lots of bits. It's very varied. So no day is the same, and I will always have contentious and non-contentious work on the go. But yes, I absolutely agree with what Karen said. We'll very often be involved at something from the outset, which may then over time escalate into something more contentious. So I think if you're trying to think about what kind of employment law is that you're interested in, the best place probably to start is by looking at a firm's website to see what are their primary areas of focus. You know, do they talk about being involved in employment disputes and offering kind of strategic advice to clients on day-to-day employment matters, or is it more focused on you know, maybe the more transaction-based work? And I imagine most firms will be quite varied in the types of support they provide to their clients, because clients want that full service from their advisors. So I would expect you get to be involved in a good range of things at most firms, certainly coming in at a junior level. To give you, you know, kind of give yourself the chance to find out what it is that you like and where do you excel.
Okay, great. And just thinking about your own, you know, your own practice and what you do. I mean, how does your day sort of break down? I mean, are you always, you know, in the office or the home office the majority of the time? Are you going out and meeting clients? Are you, you know, are you in meetings, or are you sort of sitting there and doing stuff on your own? How does that all break down?
So we have a hybrid policy, as I imagine every firm does now post-COVID.
Sure.
So generally within our team, we go into the office around 2 days a week, and I work 4 days. So I'll be in the office 2 days and then at home 2 days, which is a really nice balance. And we plan it so that we are all in the office on the same day within our team, so we can have face-to-face discussions, which is really helpful.
And what's your just quickly, what is your team? What does your team comprise of as far as personnel?
So within Edinburgh, there's 3 of us, just in the employment law team, and then the rest of our team, another 25 or so, are based in the Bristol office. So we have twice weekly full team meetings where we'll all dial into a Teams call to run through capacity, what people are working on, and any business development initiatives. So we're all, as a team, regularly catching up. And then throughout the day, there'll be a number of Teams calls with colleagues. I would say I'm speaking to clients every day, but that it's mostly done by Teams calls now, which is interesting. Pre-COVID, it would have been a lot more, I would have said, in-face meetings, but now for ease, a lot of it is done virtually. But yeah, there are still face-to-face meetings as well. But that tends to be more if there's kind of a bigger purpose to it, or maybe a large number of people attending. I would say video meetings are the norm.
Okay, great. And Karen, how is your day-to-day life? I mean, maybe this is the time to talk a bit more in detail about investigations. I mean, I'm envisaging this. You know, you're down there on your own, getting under the side of things, but I'm sure you're actually working in a much bigger team, and it's a communal effort.
Yeah. So the investigations team sort of sits within our employment team. So it's people who are kind of, we spend part of our time doing normal employment work, so kind of advisory work, contentious work, whatever it might be. But then we are from time to time appointed to conduct investigations. Typically we'll be brought in where there's some sort of a very serious allegation, or it's against somebody very senior, or both. So we will meet with the witnesses. That can be face-to-face in real life, or it can be on Teams. The trainees and paralegals in our team will attend those meetings as well as note takers, so that we have a record of the meetings. We search for other evidence, so that might be looking for doing email searches and liaising with the IT team within a client to get them to look for documents and data for us. We might be looking at CCTV records, we might be looking at swipe card records, all sorts of things like that, to try and piece together the evidence in relation to an allegation. And then we can pull that together into a sort of report that sets out all the evidence we've found. And we're most often asked to then reach findings in terms of what did or didn't happen, to the extent that we can from the evidence that's available. So that can be quite intense work. It's unlike any other employment law work that I do, because you're in the rest of the work, you're one step removed from the kind of the emotion of it all. Whereas if you're interviewing somebody who says something awful has happened to them, or interviewing someone who is accused of having done something awful, that is quite a different experience from talking to the HR team or talking to the owners of the business or the legal team about how to manage a particular issue. So it's it's really fascinating work. People put a lot of trust in you to come to the right conclusions, and it matters. The outcomes of these things make a huge difference to people's lives. So it's really important work, and we take it very seriously.
Well, that leads on, I guess, to a fairly obvious question, which is, so how did you end up in this area? I mean, what's been your sort of personal journey into employment law? If we start with you, Karen. Yeah,
so starting off with employment law, so I joined Lewis Silkin based on its reputation as a media firm. We have a lot of media clients, and that was what I was excited about when I was at law school. So I joined. And I thought, well, I'll get this employment seat out of the way early, did it as my first seat, and have never looked back. I loved it. It was, I really enjoyed the media work as well, but ultimately for me, the breadth of employment work was what pulled me in. So that's what drew me into employment law. And then after about 15 years or so of practice as an employment lawyer, then we had the kind of the various movements that led to, so obviously we had we conducted a big investigation that was very high profile into some allegations against an A-list celebrity. That sort of kicked off the investigations work for us. That really started to kind of build traction in relation to that. And then there was obviously a bit of a sea change in terms of how allegations of discrimination and harassment were being raised and being dealt with through the various sort of movements that we've seen that have kind of changed people's attitudes, I think, in a big way. And it meant that I think that there was just a lot more appetite for organisations to get to the bottom of issues and actually grasp the nettle. And so that led to there being more and more demand for investigations work. So that's what has gradually, I found that work fascinating, and that's what's led me to now establish a sort of formal team where we focus on that kind of work, as well as the day-to-day advisory work.
Great. So this is a classic example of law firm business development where a niche appears and lawyers sort of fill in that void and become more specialised in order to provide a specific service.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's one of the things that I've always loved about. I've been at Lewis Silkin throughout my career, and I've always loved the fact that we're always ready to innovate. We're ready to do something different. If we see a need, we'll pivot and we'll adapt to it. And in order to be able to provide this kind of holistic service to our clients. So it's that's something that there's no sort of like trying to turn the oil tanker or it takes 15 years of committee meetings to get a decision made. It's just we see an opportunity, we can do it, and we can go for it, which is really exciting.
Great. Okay. And it's by the sound of things, there's various other bits of the firm that have developed in similar ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we've got one of the things when there was a huge amount of pressure in the last recession that we realised there was a more and more demand for lower cost offerings. So we developed our rock hoppers, which are completely home-based lawyers who provide email and telephone support between 9 AM and 6 PM. So it's a kind of a completely different sort of service, really, really high quality advice, but they're not available round the clock like some of our lawyers are for the big transactions and the big kind of disputes where it's a kind of a bet the farm type issues. So being able to sort of pivot, create that, set it up and go really quickly was really important. We had lots of demand for secondments for our lawyers to go in-house and spend time in-house. So we set up a whole in-house arm where we recruited people specifically for them to go and be sent on secondments, because it was otherwise difficult for our other clients if their lawyers suddenly started disappearing midway through matters. So there have been lots of examples of things like that where we We just sort of see a problem and think, well, it's our role to solve it and find a way to solve it.
Right, great, really, that's really fascinating. So Rebecca, now tell us about your personal journey. I think you've, speaking about changing and adapting, I think you're relatively new at your current firm. So how did all that develop?
Yeah, so I got into employment law my first kind of flavour of it was I did an HR placement while I was at university one summer within the HR team of a big Scottish law firm. And I really loved it, and I ended up applying for a traineeship at that firm and got the traineeship, started it 3 years later. I think it's always quite a long lead-in time from first being at a firm to then starting your traineeship, especially if you go and do a summer placement. I then had my 2 years of training, and within that we did 4 seats with 6 months in each. So I had 6 months in employment, and I knew immediately it was exactly what I wanted to do, which was a massive relief for me, because at university I had not been clear at all on what kind of law it was I was going to end up doing. So I'd gone to a big Scottish firm who were full service and did a range of work to try and give myself the best chance of finding out what might fit. So decided I loved employment law, and when I was coming up for the end of my 2-year traineeship, the firms released what are called the NQ job lists, which some people might be at that stage at the moment where you're starting to think about qualification and what you're going to go and do next. So an employment job came up for an NQ, so I applied for that, got the role, and worked there really, really happily, and absolutely loved it. And I actually just recently moved firm off the back of my maternity leave. I was on maternity leave for a year, and during that time was offered a new role at Burges Salmon, which I started in September. So it was a little bit daunting coming back from time off and moving to a new firm and wondering if I'd remember anything about the law, let alone how to get to grips with a new firm. But it's all worked out really well, and I'm been very happy with the move. And luckily the employment law knowledge has come flooding back, so it's all okay.
And I think I'm right in thinking you're originally Scottish qualified, but you're able to advise on English and Scottish law, is that right?
Yes. So I went to university in Edinburgh and then trained at and qualified at a Scottish firm, and I'm now working at Burges Salmon, which is Bristol headquartered but has an Edinburgh office. But for the employment law team, that we advise clients across the UK, and there are some differences, so there's some kind of niche discretions that we need to be aware of under Scots law, but yes, we can advise English clients as the law applies UK wide.
Great, okay, and I guess that moves us quite seamlessly on to what is the law now. You're in an area where the law changes quite a lot. How does that impact on what you do and how you work?
Hugely. I think if you're looking at a career in employment law, then you would benefit from having some interest in keeping an eye on case updates and changes to legislation, because it really does evolve fairly often. We are very lucky to have 2 support lawyers within our team, so they keep tabs on what's happening and produce updates for us, and we then prepare updates for clients as well. But yes, there's a lot on the table at the moment. If you want me to touch on that, give people a flavour.
What's making you think or giving you opportunities to provide some new services to clients at the moment?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest, which is causing a lot of headache and worry for lots of people, is the proposed revocation of the EU laws, which could have hugely significant impact. If anyone's not aware, in a nutshell, there's a bill which, if it's passed, then all EU retained law will be automatically revoked by the end of 2023, unless the government takes steps to preserve the legislation or postpone a decision until 2026 to buy us a little bit more time. And it's of concern, I suppose, in the employment law sphere, because so many of our rights have derived from EU law. So there's been a lot of speculation about what might happen, and frustratingly at the moment we don't really know. I think we can be fairly comfortable that a wholesale repeal of everything seems unlikely. But it might be that we see simplification of some more technical parts of the law, so maybe around holiday pay or to pay obligations which apply on a transfer of a business to protect the individual's employment. So at the moment it's really a wait and see, but it could be significant, so it's something that we're keeping a close eye on at the moment.
And what are you saying to your clients then at the moment? Just hold your horses and keep your eyes open, and we'll come to you when something's there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're monitoring it and waiting for updates. And that there's a number of other bills passing through at the moment, looking at things like flexible working and carers leave. So yeah, there's always a real need to be keeping an eye on what government is doing and what the case law decisions have been.
Great, thank you. And Karen, are there any particular pieces of legislation or change that are particularly impacting on you, or you think are presenting opportunities for yourselves as lawyers, or perhaps the businesses you're advising?
I mean, nothing really to add to what Rebecca has said about the kind of there's this big watching brief. There's all sorts of change that's been proposed, and frankly, the Parliament has been a little bit distracted for the last goodness knows how long. So there's been all sorts of things that we've been expecting to happen, but they haven't. I mean, ultimately, change means there's work for us, because we need to help our clients make sure they understand it. When they need to make sure that they make all the necessary, either tweaks or wholesale changes to what they're doing in order to adapt to them. But I think everyone's sort of in a bit of a holding pattern at the moment, waiting for what's actually going to come out of it. And then, of course, as soon as we know, then we will all the whole machine kicks into motion in terms of training and updating precedents. And again, like Rebecca said, we're hugely fortunate. We have a team of professional support lawyers who are fantastic and whose job is to keep us up to date. And I guess that going back to what you said at the start about the difference in different sizes of firms, that again is something that if you were in a very small team, you might not have the luxury, and you might have to do that all yourself. Whereas it's in a larger team, you have the absolute pleasure of it being sort of spoon-fed to you in terms of the updates and the key things you need to know about. But yes, there's that. There's upskilling ourselves, and then there's upskilling our clients, and we all just wait to leap. But whenever there's change, that creates work for the lawyers.
Sure. And how do policymakers listen to employment lawyers when they're making policy? How does that process work? How does government and the experts who have actually got to enact this stuff to communicate?
They listen a bit. I think so. We certainly. So the big organisation from our perspective in relation to this is the Employment Lawyers Association. So rather than every single firm or individual employment lawyer putting their thoughts into the government consultations, we tend to the ELA, the Employment Lawyers Association, tends to form working parties. So people who have particular interest or specialism in a specific area can put themselves forward, and they put forward really, really well thought out constructive feedback. Sometimes it is taken into consideration and changes are made. Sometimes the politics outweigh it and nothing happens, but you've got to feel like you're trying.
So some of they do something and you say, well, we told you so. Here's what we said.
100%. Where we say chaos will follow, and chaos does follow. But
yeah. But at least it means small work for lawyers. I mean, how do you go about finding new business? I mean, what's the process there for that across, I guess, the whole range of employment services?
So, I mean, you have the formal set pieces where companies will put out a piece of work to tender and you can pitch for it. But to be honest, that's that's the least common way, I think, of actually winning work. I think the majority of the work you win is through word of mouth, through recommendations, through networking. So, and I've always been a very firm believer of the fact that the best advert for your work is your work. And if you do a really fantastic job for someone, then that person will recommend you to the next person. And that takes time to build. Of course, you know, in your first year of practice, you won't have loads of sort of repeat clients because you've only just started out. But certainly, you know, I've been doing this for terrifyingly more than 20 years, and you do. It's amazing the amount of people who come back or recommend you to somebody else, and you network. You stay in touch with people. So HR people tend to stay in HR, so you stay in contact with people, and when they go to their new company, then they will start to instruct you. And actually, I think for people who are just starting out in their careers, that can seem really terrifying. How am I ever going to make those connections and know people that well? But it's really important to remember that, you know, whoever is the junior person that you might be dealing with as a trainee, by the time you're knocking on the door of partnership, that person might be really senior in the organisation that they're working with. So we really encourage our trainees and our newly qualified lawyers all the way through to network, to stay in touch with their network, because it's a long burn, slow burn process, and it's really, really valuable to keep those connections. Stay in touch with people from law school, because, you know, some of those people will become lawyers who sometimes, you know, you get conflicted and you have to refer work elsewhere, and so you refer it to someone you know and trust. So all of those things, it's all about getting out there, talking to people, staying connected. And yes, of course, there's all sorts you can do in terms of formal pitches and making your firm look amazing. And, you know, clients have huge expectations in relation to ESG, diversity, being a responsible business. And, you know, that is so important to our firm. And, you know, it's something that we absolutely you know, focus on for us, but also because clients demand it. And, you know, that will all be part of the picture as well.
Sure. Okay. And Rebecca, I mean, I guess it's an interesting, you know, thinking about networking still, you know, as someone coming back into employment and changing firms, you know, what have you done to maintain your networks or to develop your networks during this sort of quite big period of flux in your life?
Yeah, I've tried to do quite a bit. So I've gone along to events. Excuse me. I've gone along to networking events, both legally focused and just for the local area. So within Edinburgh, that there are quite a lot of business network events, where you can go along to just to meet people and kind of refamiliarize yourself. Because if you've been out of the swing of networking, it can be a bit daunting walking into a room for the first time and trying to decide who you're going to speak to and how you're going to introduce yourself. So I sometimes find that if you go along to things fairly often, you just become a little bit more comfortable with it. But yeah, I think we since trainee stage, I've always been encouraged to network with peers on the client side and at other firms, and it is so true, because everyone moves up and progresses. So yeah, people at your level will at some stage become those who have the power to be instructing. So I think that's something to really bear in mind when you're at the university stage, that you might end up working with friends, whether they're at another firm, or end up going in-house to be on the client side. So when you're thinking about connections, it can start fairly close to home. It doesn't always have to be people who are, you know, already clients of the firm. So yeah, we've do a lot of external events, and we're trying to set up some Edinburgh-based events from the firm as well.
Okay, and as a, you know, as a lawyer, or maybe as a team, or an individual, or as a team, how do you go about sort of, I guess, sort of showcasing your greatest hits and all the things you've done before? Because I mean, as Karen said, your work is your best advertisement. How do you know, you can't really walk into an event and go, well, I did this and this matter. That sounds a bit crass. So how do you actually sort of articulate that sort of thing?
So we have lots of very helpful resources and brilliant marketing and bids and proposals specialists who help us with pulling together those types of materials, whether it's for going along to an event or for submitting a tender for a client who's looking to find new legal advisors. So yeah, we do get a lot of assistance with that, which is very helpful.
Great, and of course, yeah, it's not entirely domestic work. There's international aspects to employment law work. How does the firm address, you know, when there are matters that have got a reach across more than one jurisdiction?
Yeah, and it happens fairly often that there'll be an international element to a piece of work. So Burges Salmon is a UK-based firm, but we are part of an international network. So that means that if we are advising a client or working on a matter where there might be international elements to it, we can coordinate the international advice for them, right from, you know, sourcing a quote to instructing the work and then giving them the finished product. So it can allow the client to have, I suppose, one point of contact for their legal advice. So even though we don't ourselves have the offices and lawyers based abroad, we work with other independent firms to provide that service.
Okay, and Karen, that sometimes similar with you, I think you actually have an even more formalised network. Is that right?
Yes, so we have offices in Ireland and in Hong Kong, so that covers those jurisdictions. Outside of those jurisdictions, we have we're a member of an alliance called Jus Laboris, which is we have a member in virtually every jurisdiction that we do business in the world. And we work really closely with those firms to be able to deliver international work. So one example is there's a big media organisation where out of our team in the UK, we run their international employment law help desk. So they can call with any query anywhere in the world, and we then be able to work with our partner firm in whichever jurisdiction to get the answer for them. And make it sort of seamless in terms of it, particularly in relation to billing. That all happens behind the scenes. The client doesn't need to deal with any kind of complex arrangements there. The other thing is that we try and make sure that the alliance comes to life. So we bring people who are doing the work together. We have an international congress once a year that brings everyone together. We have international working groups. So I sit on the international expert group for investigations. So I'm in touch with my counterpart in all the different jurisdictions, and we talk about what's going on, or global trends, or the EU whistleblower directive and how that's going to impact on our clients globally. So it really brings it to life. And for our junior lawyers, we have sort of international kind of project management courses and things like that, so that they know their colleagues and they work closely together.
Great. Okay. Going back to the just sort of more practical advice for the audience, going back to the resources available for lawyers in the fields. Now you've both mentioned sort of PSLs helping you out, but are there any sort of really key resources that anyone that's worth their salt in employment is reading or keeping an eye on, and that perhaps someone that's looking to research the area should be consulting on a regular basis?
Yes, through university, you might have access to LexisNexis and Practical Law. From memory, I definitely had LexisNexis, but I can't remember whether we had access to Practical Law or not. But if you have access to either of those, you'll be able to find a huge amount of resources, and you can subscribe for legal updates through those. Another place worth looking is law firms' websites. So, for example, we have podcasts covering to-pay transfers and legal issues that can arise in recruitment, and a whole host of other topics. And we've got a number of video conversations as well. And I imagine lots of other firms have that as well. I know that I listened to a lot of podcasts while I was on maternity leave, just to feel like I was keeping some kind of finger on the pulse while out and about on a buggy walk. So yeah, even just searching on your podcast app for employment law should pull up quite a few things.
And do many people in your team, create this content as well? Are you expected to write an article from time to time or anything?
Yes, we do. We produce quite a lot of content in different forms. So yes, it might be updates that are going out to clients as bulletins, or it could be one of these videos or podcasts. And yeah, that's a team effort, so that everyone's contributing to that.
Okay, and are you the same, Karen? Are you sometimes the public face of the firm's expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. We will do similar sorts of things: webinars, podcasts, articles. Again, have a look on our website. We have an insights section which has loads of information. We also have something called the Future of Work Hub, which has lots of sort of future-looking, strategic thought leadership in terms of what might be coming next. So looking at AI and robotics, for example, and the impact that that's likely to have in the world of work. So there's loads of information. The only other thing that I thought of that actually, just in terms of giving you a real general overview of employment issues, is the ACAS website. Is pretty good. They've got loads of codes of conduct and guides that help employers and employees understand the basics of employment law, and that's absolutely free to access. So definitely a good one to have a look at.
Yeah, I mean, I would add as another resource available to you listeners, the Lexology, which is produced by the same people that bring you Law Careers Net, the same company, which is a website that consolidates lots of information coming out of lots of different law firms, and you can search that by jurisdiction and by practice area. So if there's any area that you're looking to research, that's a good one to look as well, Lexology. Rebecca, what's the most fun about being an employment lawyer?
I think when it genuinely is enjoyable. At the end of the day, you're going to be advising on something that's going to affect people's lives. So I find it very engaging. And sometimes you can maybe put yourselves, if I was in the shoes of this employee, how would I want to be treated? So you can advise your clients with a real human element in mind. And clients are generally very lovely as well, and so I find that it's a really rewarding area of the law to work in, and I would really highly recommend it to anyone looking for a path into employment law to pursue it. Okay,
and Karen, what do you like the most of it, and also maybe what do you find the most frustrating?
So in terms of what I like the most, I mean, yeah, I agree completely with Rebecca. It's really fast paced. No 2 days are the same. You get to build up really long lasting client relationships. You can have some you can have a laugh with your clients and have a chat about things, and that matters, and absolutely, it makes a difference. What we're doing really does make a difference to people's lives. People's careers and what happens to them at work is a big part of their identity and their self-worth. So it's all kind of feels significant. What's frustrating? I mean, I'm not sure there really is anything about employment law that's frustrating. I mean, I suppose perhaps that's part of the practice I'm in, that we're very much able to do what we enjoy doing, and there'll be someone else who enjoys doing the bits you don't. I can't stand corporate support work. I would not want to spend my life doing that, so I don't do it. It's really straightforward. So yeah, that's, for me, is the beauty of being in a really big, flexible team that has grown. There were only 20 of us when I joined, and there's about 200 of us now. So it's changed dramatically over the time I've been at the firm, but yeah, in a good way.
Sure. I mean, do you think is demand for employment law advice increasing? I mean, are we seeing more and more employment lawyers being born every year, or is it sort of a solid state?
It's a growth area as far as I'm concerned. It's there's plenty to do. The consequences of getting it wrong can be quite significant, and we kind of spread our net into new areas like investigations. It's you can kind of reinvent yourself fairly regularly depending on what's going on in society and in terms of political developments.
Cool. And Rebecca, I mean, you clearly love your area. Just thinking about your firm as a whole, which other areas look like they're having the most fun? Which ones are most enjoyable to interact with, I guess?
I would say I interact most closely with the corporate team, and I think if you are interested in corporate work, then that would be an amazing career to have. I knew that it wasn't for me personally, but yeah.
Do you have to do any of their crazy hours when you're working on their deals?
Sometimes, if a deal is nearing completion, then it might be that they just need a response, and that is sometimes just part of the job that you have to do it, but it's never constant, and it'll only be, you know, a short-lived thing.
Right. Okay. Now we're pretty much near our time limit, so I guess a final word from both of you. What, start with you, Rebecca. What advice would you give someone who is thinking about becoming an employment lawyer now, or B, who is just starting out as an employment lawyer, having maybe in a seat or even as an NQ position?
I think I would say, if you're at that stage, and that was me not that long ago, your job is more enjoyable if you have a genuine interest in the subject matter, and I think you can nurture that interest by really keeping on top of what the developments are and what's happening, what are potential trends, so reading around the subject where you can, it's helpful, and I think looking at what other firms are saying on things is important, as well as contributing to and reading articles produced within your own firm. So yeah, I think I would say read around it as much as you can, get involved in ELA committees or other local employment law groups to you to make some connections with people close by or at a similar level, and yeah, good luck.
Okay. Great, thank you. And sorry, Karen, you get to go second after Rebecca's already picked the meat of it. So anything else to add on that?
I mean, I think if you're sort of just starting out and you haven't got your training contract yet, I think trying to get experience if you possibly can. And I know it's easier said than done in terms of getting vacation placements, but one example is we've had quite a few people who've joined our team from an HR career. So there's nothing wrong with going and working in an HR team for a year, getting some proper experience of what good advice looks like from the client end, and bringing that experience with you. Or just any sort of work experience will help. But obviously, the closer it can be to HR or employment law, the better.
I suppose that every job you do, there's going to be employment issues because every job's got employees.
Exactly. Thinking about what didn't go well, what did your contract say, why did it say that? Trying to kind of apply your lawyer's mind to all of those things is really helpful. And again, I think in terms of if you've started out in your career and you're wanting to know what will take you to the next level, I think it's all about asking the questions to make sure you really understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. Don't just see a task as a task. You want to understand, how does that task fit into the bigger picture of this? Why am I doing it? Because then you can start to see, oh well, but maybe it would be even better if I also did this, or I could, and then you can start being proactive and saying, kind of identifying the next step and offering to do it before anyone's asked you. Those sorts of things really show that you've got it, that you understand why you're there and what your role is.
Right, great. Well, look, thank you both very much for all those insights. I think we've really got a feel that employment law sounds like a pretty good area to be in, actually. So I hope you've been inspired what we've heard today. And I'm now going to hand over back to Niamh. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks very much to our panelists.